All right, everybody, I think we'll go ahead. It's top of the hour. Welcome again to today's Orange Tree Employment Screening webinar, How to Build the Perfect Drug Test Policy. We're excited to have Bill Current, founder and president of Current Consulting Group, join us as a keynote speaker today to talk about that topic. I'm sure it's on your minds, and an ever-changing, ever-complex sort of environment that you all have to hire folks in and manage their employment tenure. So we look forward to Bill's presentation in a moment. Meantime, I am Jeff Ernst, the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer at Orange Tree Employment Screening, a full-service background screen provider for the background screening industry. And obviously, we offer drug testing and occupational health services. Just a couple of things about Orange Tree, and perhaps before I go into this chart, just a quick reminder. We will have a handout available, and if it's not already uploaded into the chat tool, it will be shortly. The webinar is being recorded, so it can be shared with colleagues. We'll send you an email later after the presentation today, and you'll be able to watch again, look for parts, and or, as I mentioned, share with others, and feel free to do so. And finally, there are Sherman education credits available for those who attend the live session today, and that information will also be distributed. So final thing, submit your questions along the way, and we will do our best to, as moderators working in conjunction with Bill, to interject those questions if we have a pause. And I know Bill takes questions along the way, and if for whatever reason we miss it, or there are questions just a little bit later in a topic, don't worry, we'll get to it at the end of the webinar. And occasionally with Bill, because he's such a great presenter and always adds a lot of context to the question in a thoughtful and thorough answer, occasionally we run out of time, but we will follow up with you after that. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So for those of you who are familiar with Orange Tree, we hope that you have been the benefactor of a program that we've designed in your best interest, background screen program. For those of you that may be looking for background screen providers, please know that at Orange Tree, it's all about you and what you're trying to accomplish. And our goal is to become your teammate and trusted partner for your background screening needs. We consider, in addition to the full services that you would need, criminal checks, verifications, et cetera, the list, drug testing, occupational health services, we have to offer that in order to get your attention. And it kind of boils down what you've told us over the course of time to the three distinct areas of differentiation amongst providers. It comes down to the technology, comes down to compliance, as well as client services. How do we support our clients? And in terms of technology, Orange Tree has its own, we have our own platform. We have an in-house development team. We are constantly innovating and building additional scalability to handle the needs that you have today, as well as to grow with you in the future. From a compliance point of view, nothing leaves the doors of Orange Tree unless it's compliant. It is a cornerstone of our business. And finally, we take great pride in offering you white glove service with a dedicated account manager, despite the growth in all of the capabilities that we have. So we say it this way: if you are not experiencing what you're looking for, if there are some technology gaps or services gaps, expect more, contact Orange Tree. A little bit more about where the rubber meets the road in terms of being a technology-enabled service. And we have a lot of customer-facing technology and ATS integrations. We have every popular integration already built. There are new ones emerging every day, and we're happy to build those, and we do so regularly for our clients. We also use technology to enable an engaging candidate experience. We all know that people want to use their mobile device throughout the course of the process. We've been doing so for years, and we also know that texts are read within 3 seconds. So Orange Tree delivers a technology for you, for your candidates. And we also deliver it in our ability to provide the turnaround times and accuracy in the data reports that you would expect. More than 40% of our criminal checks actually come back with, we call it a lights out or speed of light background check. It comes back in seconds, whatever the speed of fiber optic connectivity is between our system and the data source, it comes back to Orange Tree. We're constantly looking at ways to use technology for your benefit. We have a saying here: we do our job so you can do yours. One of the key things that our clients ask us for is help with their candidates. We handle that help directly. We will interact with your candidates. You keep recruiting, they interact with us, one conversation to keep the background check going in those instances where they need some help. It's all wrapped and surrounded by security, confidentiality, capabilities with our PBSA and our SOC 2 Type 2 certification. So if you're looking for some data points, what's the proof behind these claims? It's right there at the bottom. We do a lot of searches per employee. So the question is answered there. We have more room to grow without adding headcount. We have excellent turnaround time. That's a full order turnaround time at 2.92 days. We're pretty proud of that. And we're equally as proud as candidates continue to expect more from mobile experiences. The fact that we retain a 90% easy and very easy rating, we think is a testament to our tool and to the capabilities of our organization. So with that, I am going to turn the slide deck over to Bill Current, President and Founder of Current Consulting. And Bill will be joining us and taking us through today's topic of how to design the perfect drug test policy. Bill is a long-term member of the drug testing industry, probably one of the founders. And he's well published, he's well spoken, he is a sought after expert, and it's really just our privilege to have you with us today, Bill. Thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to share my screen on this end, but I want to make a comment. Jeff and I have done countless webinars together, and what I like about the way Orange Tree does this, and Jeff in particular, is that these presentations are not intended to be salesy, but they are intended to showcase the quality of the service and the source of information that Orange Tree is for its clients and prospective clients. And so I love doing these webinars with Jeff. I also want to comment on being one of the founders of the industry. I got into this business in 1989, and by then there were companies doing drug testing, of course, but the industry itself sort of didn't exist yet as such. It was really another, I don't know, 2 or 3 years before the formality of the organization of the industry came into play. And so I've been at it for a long time, 34 years now. The Current Consulting Group is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, and we're excited about that. Let me share my screen here, and just give me 1 second. Then I'm going to turn my camera off so that it's not a distraction to the audience. So, okay.
We can see it, Bill.
What are you seeing? Are you seeing the introduction slide?
We can see your introduction slide.
Okay, let me, is it changing?
It is.
Okay, perfect, perfect, thank you. So let me get back to today's agenda. So we're gonna go through this agenda, but I would like to invite you to just ask any questions that you have related to today's topic or anything to do with drug testing. We're happy to entertain any questions that you have. And as Jeff mentioned, we'll have a Q&A section at the end, but if there, for whatever reason, there are questions we don't get to, we will respond to those in a written format so that all of your questions get answered. And so let me set the table first, excuse me, with an introduction on why drug testing. So every year for the 25 years the Current Consulting Group has been in existence, we've conducted a survey of the drug testing industry. And we also now, for the last 6-7 years now, conduct a survey of employers on drug testing. And so I'm going to, and Orange Tree has been a generous sponsor of our, co-sponsor of our employer survey. I'm going to share a couple of statistics from our surveys to kind of help set the table for a discussion about drug testing policy. So when we asked employers what benefits their company realized from drug testing, you can see the responses there. 83% said that they felt that it improved safety in the workplace. If you go to the middle blue bar, a better company reputation. And if you go all the way over to the right, the gray bar, able to hire better quality employees. Now, yes, 62% said that was one of the benefits they got from drug testing. That means there perhaps are a lot of companies that don't see it that way, 38%. But the point is that most companies realize some very important benefits from drug testing, from a safer workplace, which means lower accidents, fewer workers' compensation claims, and as a result, lower costs, but also being able to hire the kind of people that you want to hire, the kind of people that make your company better. And that's where that reputation comes in the middle there. So drug testing has lots of positive results for employers besides the drug test results themselves. Now, when you put a policy together, one of the things, I'm going to talk about this in more detail in a second, but one of the things you start out with is a purpose statement. The purpose statement explains why you're doing what you're doing, why you're drug testing the way you're drug testing. And so most companies cite safety in the workplace, or they'll talk about compliance with federal regulations like the DOT regulations or state laws. And let me just, I did promise that I would turn off my video so it's not a distraction for you. But there are a lot of reasons why companies do drug testing. You know, on the previous slide, we saw what employers consider to be the benefits of drug testing, but what were their objectives going into it? Improve productivity, controlling the cost of doing business. And you see the whole list there. It's different from company to company. If you're a company in a safety sensitive workplace environment, your main concern is probably going to be safety and workers' compensation claims and things of that nature. If you're in a manufacturing plant, it's going to be productivity. If you're working in retail, it may be employee theft. Regardless of the reason, that becomes sort of the blueprint for your entire policy. How you do drug testing, when you test, who's subject to testing, et cetera, is all based on why you're doing it. And so identifying the reasons why you do drug tests or why you want to do drug testing is very important to the success of your program. Now, there are lots of different federal regulations and state laws that affect an employer's decisions on drug testing. Many states, now let me start out by saying no two states have the same drug testing law. There are mandatory laws, like in Iowa, for example. There's voluntary laws, like here in Florida, where I live, where companies voluntarily choose to participate in a drug testing program, and then they qualify for certain benefits, et cetera. Like here in Florida, companies can qualify for a 5% discount in their workers' compensation premiums. But you have to drug test in compliance with the guidelines provided by the state. And of course, there's the DOT regulations, which if you're a DOT covered employer in some type of safety sensitive transportation industry, then you must drug test according to those DOT regulations. And they're very specific and they're very strict and detailed. Part of the decision you're going to make when it comes to the policy is who's going to be covered by the policy. Again, if you fall under the DOT regulations, it's very specific. You must test applicants for certain safety sensitive occupations. You must test employees in the same occupations, but under certain circumstances, like on a random basis or post-accident, reasonable suspicion, et cetera. But outside of those DOT regulations, you're going to be governed by state laws. Now, not all states have either a voluntary or a mandatory drug testing law, but that doesn't mean there aren't laws in your state that will govern how you do testing and when and who you test. And so there may be some restrictions. This is especially true. You know, Jeff and I were reminiscing about my 34 years in the industry, but more recently, over the last 10, 12 years, the legalization of marijuana on a state-by-state basis has had a direct impact on how employers do drug testing. There are some states that are very particular about the rights of employers to not to drug test. You have that right in every state, with a couple of minor exceptions like New York. But what you do with the result of the test. And so you might choose to test all employees on a random basis, or you may choose to conduct testing of employees after an accident or when there's reasonable suspicion that the individual is under the influence, but you may be restricted in how you use the results. But your policy is not only going to articulate the reason why you have a drug testing program, your purpose statement, but it's also going to get into the very specifics about who should be tested, who's covered by the policy. Keep in mind that your drug testing policy may cover lots of other issues besides drug testing. And that's all going to be in the policy. And you're also going to be very specific about who's covered by the individual sections of the policy. For example, you may choose, and this is outside the DOT regulations, but you may choose to conduct pre-employment testing. But will it be for all applicants or only applicants for certain positions, perhaps safety sensitive positions? Same with employees. Will it be all employees subject to testing, or employees in certain locations, or employees in certain occupations, especially safety sensitive occupations? So that all gets articulated in the policy. Why is that important? Because it tells your employees, it tells your company who the policy applies to, and it allows you as an employer to, one, be very specific and consistent in how you carry out your policy. Consistency is very important, but also it puts you in a position to be able to not, as you share your program with your employees, to never be put in a position of somebody coming and saying, I didn't know, because you're going to document the employees who participate in training to know what's in the policy, so that nobody can come back and say, you never told me, or I didn't know, or this isn't fair, because you've treated everyone equally and you've carried out the policy consistently from year to year, from location to location, so that as an employer, you're protected in that regard. Nobody can come back and say, this isn't fair because you never told me. So a big part of your program, of your policy, of course, is the drug testing part. And the first question most employers want to know today is, can we still test? And especially as it pertains to the legalization of marijuana. Now, this map is constantly changing. After we submitted the slides for this presentation, Delaware, as you see there in orange, approved recreational marijuana. The orange states are recreational marijuana laws. The blue states are medical marijuana laws, and the white states are states that don't have either one. All of the orange states also have medical marijuana. Some of the blue states also have recreational marijuana, like I think it's South Dakota. But we've set up the map this way so that you can kind of see how the legalization of marijuana is pretty much throughout the country now. And Delaware, we just updated that Delaware is now an orange state, whereas if we'd done this webinar last month, they would have been a blue state. And there's some other pending legislation in various white states that would possibly make marijuana either legal medicinally or for recreational purposes. But the main message with this map is, don't be intimidated by the map. Just because marijuana has been legalized in a state that you do business in doesn't mean that you can't have a drug-free workplace policy and even conduct drug testing. There may be restrictions or better put, conditions on what you do with a positive result for marijuana, but you're still in a position as an employer to have a policy in place and to require your employees to comply with that policy, including drug testing. Now, we're at a point right now where positive drug test results are increasing every year. This is just one source. It's a good source. It's the Quest Diagnostics Drug Testing Index that highlights the results from the millions of drug tests that Quest conducts every year for workplace drug testing. I just want to point out a couple of things. That second bullet, it's really an add-on to the first bullet, but basically marijuana positive test results are now at the highest level ever in the history of the Quest Drug Testing Index. And if you go down to the fourth bullet, marijuana positivity rates have surged over 118% in states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana. Between 2012 and 2020, it went up 118%. This report comes out every year. So it's a great source of being able to look at a trend line. And we see that, in fact, let me go to the next slide and just show you this. The increase in drug abuse in all these different categories here has been consistent in most drug categories. You can see the people who admit in a government survey that they use psychotherapeutics or abuse psychotherapeutic drugs like antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, etc. That's gone down slightly, but you can see where marijuana has gone up significantly. And so This is a report that comes out from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration every year, SAMHSA. And this shows the trend line for drug abuse. If you go back to the previous slide, this is the trend line for positive drug test results in the workplace. So as drug abuse is increasing throughout the country, particularly in states that have legalized marijuana for recreational use, then we see that the workplace is directly impacted by this overall increase in drug abuse throughout the country. Now, if you're putting a policy together, you really can't have a comprehensive program in place unless you have a dedicated section in your policy to the whole issue of marijuana, whether you're in a state that's legalized it for medical purposes or for recreational use. Now, again, as I mentioned, no two states have the same drug testing law. No two states have the same marijuana or legal marijuana laws. It varies from state to state. So you want to make sure that you understand what the state laws say in the states where you have business operations. One of the most common questions we get asked is, I'm in multiple states, so which state law applies to me? And the answer, as you could probably guess, is all of them. Whatever states you have business operations in, where you have employees working for you, you're required to comply with those laws. Workers' comp laws, the unemployment comp laws, but also the drug testing laws and the marijuana laws. So your policy has to reflect this diversity of laws that apply to you. So you're probably going to have addendums to the policy for individual states. Rather than write one or multiple policies, you can cover most issues in a single policy and then add addendums to the policy to cover different issues like marijuana. And that's going to be one of the topics that you cover in your policy to make sure that it's both legally defensible and practical on a day-to-day basis toward achieving your drug-free workplace goals. Can you test for marijuana, even in marijuana-friendly states? Well, the answer is yes, you can. But there are some caveats, okay? One, you got to know what the law says. Not all legal marijuana laws say anything about the workplace, but some of them are very specific, like Illinois, like Nevada. Those are just two examples of many where states have legalized marijuana, and in their legal marijuana law, they're covering the issue of the workplace. Not all do, but many do. But the most important thing, there are two that I want to point out there. One is make sure you know what those marijuana laws say about discrimination. In most cases, they're going to be very specific that as an employer, you do not have the right to discriminate against legal users of marijuana. So if you're in a state that's legalized medicinal marijuana, for example, a legal user of medicinal marijuana is somebody who's registered with the state, who has some type of a card that says that they have that they've been authorized to use marijuana for medicinal purposes. You can't discriminate against those individuals in Illinois, Colorado, California, Nevada, etc. But at the same time, if you look at number two, you can prohibit people from using marijuana or being under the influence of marijuana while at work. So you have those rights, even in states that have legalized marijuana. But the key is to articulate that in your policy, put it in writing, and also educate your employees as to what your policy says about legal marijuana use. And the fact that you're not going to allow individuals to use marijuana at work or be under the influence of marijuana while at work. Okay, so we're gonna specifically say that in the policy. The company will not tolerate employees bringing marijuana into the workplace, employees being at work under the influence of marijuana, and you're not going to allow individuals to use marijuana while they're at work. Okay, whether it's a medical marijuana state or a recreational marijuana. Now, as you see that very last bullet on the page, you're going to want to make sure that you clarify this in your policy, whether you will accept medical marijuana use as a legitimate excuse for a positive result. That's going to be governed in large part by what your state law says. As I mentioned, certain states like Illinois, Nevada, California are very specific of, and they restrict what employers can do with a positive result for marijuana. For example, in Illinois, you can't take action based solely on that positive drug test result for marijuana. You have to have some other evidence that the individual was impaired on the job. So you're keeping a record, you're documenting aberrant behavior, unsafe behavior, etc. And the drug test, the positive drug test result, in this case for marijuana, but it could be for any drug, right, is one of the several items on your list that justify the company choosing to take adverse employment action. The point here is that you want to articulate those points in your policy. You want it to be very clear in writing that the company will not tolerate the following behavior, but we're also not going to do X, Y, or Z. Now, I point that out in the discussion about marijuana because I want to encourage you to have a marijuana section in your policy. But at the same time, it's important to note that it's not just marijuana that's going up. We have seen an increase among drug testing companies for positive test results for opioids and amphetamines in particular, in addition to marijuana. So as you can see on the far left, this is just one company's example. Marijuana positives went up about 20%, but amphetamine positives went up 215%, and opioid positives went up 273%. Even though they're smaller, the opioids is a smaller total number, the percentage increase was dramatic. This is just between 2019 and 2020. I've talked to that company and they're not seeing a continued increase, but they're not seeing those rates go down either. So it's remained steady at these new sort of norms for positive results of other drugs besides marijuana. It's also interesting to note, if you compare that far right orange bar with the one on the left for marijuana, that the amphetamine positives actually were higher, not just in percentage, but in the total number in 2020 for this one company testing, millions of people. The point in all of this is that it would probably be a mistake to just test for marijuana because we're seeing a lot of other types of drug abuse in addition to marijuana. At the same time, it's also important to note that the number one substance of abuse is alcohol. And the same report from the federal government, from SAMHSA, also includes results from their survey of people admitting to what level they use alcohol. Excuse me. A binge drinker is somebody that's had 5 or more drinks on at least one occasion in the last month. And a heavy drinker is someone who's had at least five or more drinks on at least 5 occasions in the last month. And when you add all of that up from the SAMHSA survey results, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, you find that those numbers far exceed the level of individuals who admit to using any illicit drugs on a regular basis. In other words, alcohol is by far the substance that gets used, and in the case of binge drinkers and heavy drinkers, abused more than any other substance. So with that, let's talk about how to do drug testing. And again, I'm not advocating for any one particular method, but I'm going to highlight a few things that I think are important because when you put your policy together, you want to make sure that it's clear about how you do drug testing. Okay, so right now, this could change in the future, right? Because it's different now than it was 20 years ago. But right now, there are 5 main drug testing methods that are commonly used in the workplace. There's lab-based urine, and there's point of collection or rapid result urine testing. There's hair testing, which is always a lab-based test. There's lab-based oral fluid testing, and there's also point of collection or rapid result oral fluid testing. Now, these are the 5 main drug testing methods that are in use today. 20 years ago, we didn't see a lot of hair testing. We didn't see a lot of oral fluid testing. Point of collection urine testing was really starting to pick up steam, but the majority of drug tests were lab-based urine tests, and they continue to be today. That's the drug testing method that's most used. In our survey of drug testing providers, our annual industry survey last year, we asked the question, in the future, which drug testing will be most used? 50% said urine and 44% said oral fluid. 10 years ago, the oral fluid percentage would have been less than 10%. But because of some recent developments with the federal government, we're seeing a lot more interest in oral fluid testing. So when you put lab-based urine, lab-based oral fluid, and hair testing side by side, they each have unique advantages. And you're going to pick the drug testing method that aligns best with your objectives. But of these three, the only two that have federal regulations in place are lab-based urine and more recently lab-based oral fluid testing. SAMHSA came out with final guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing for federal workplaces, meaning the Department of Defense or the Department of Justice, et cetera, in 2019. DOT came out with a notice of proposed rulemaking, meaning they're going to allow lab-based oral fluid testing. They came out with that notice of proposed rulemaking in 2022. It's already legal in 47 states, lab-based oral fluid testing. But once the DOT regulations get finalized, and we now believe that the final DOT regulations will be out any day now from a very reliable source, then I think you're going to see sort of a migration, not a heavy migration, but you're going to see a migration toward lab-based oral fluid testing. I don't believe it's going to knock lab-based urine testing off the top of the mountain. I think that's still going to be number one and will be number one for a long time to come. But companies will have a choice that they feel comfortable with because they'll be able to implement a lab-based oral fluid testing program based on federal guidelines, just like they've been able to do with urine testing over the last 30 plus years. And I think that's going to make a difference. Again, I don't think it's going to knock urine off the top of the heap, but it's going to make it easier for employers to consider alternatives. And one of the things that comes into play when you choose a drug testing method is which drugs you're going to test for. That's part of the answer to the question, how we do drug testing. So under the federal guidelines, the panel for drug testing is, they call it a 5-panel. It's, the way that I look at it, 7, but they call it a 5-panel. And it includes amphetamines, cocaine, marijuana, opiates, and phencyclidine, or PCP. You see that on the left, right? So if you're a company that falls under regulations, those are the drugs you have to test for. Under the DOT regulations for your DOT covered employers, those are the only drugs you can test for. You can't cut marijuana out of your panel. DOT requires it. My understanding is that even if Congress legalizes marijuana and moves it out of Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, that DOT has already negotiated a carve-out for safety-sensitive DOT-covered occupations. So I don't think you're going to see marijuana drop off of that panel ever. But it includes other drugs, right? And under the opiate category, you have opioids and opiates, the oxys and the hydros, et cetera. And those all come into play when you choose the drug testing method that you're going to use, lab-based urine and lab-based oral fluid testing. The good news for those two testing methods, they can test for all of these drugs. If you look at an expanded panel, and it could be 7 drugs, 9 drugs, 10 drugs, 11, 12 drugs, but as you expand the panel, you can still test for all of these common substances of use like benzodiazepines or barbiturates, et cetera, with either oral fluid, urine, or actually with hair. And that comes into play when you're choosing how to test. And you want to be very specific. Some state laws actually require it, but I think it's a good practice, a best practice in every state, regardless of what the state law says, to list the drugs or the substances that you test for and under what circumstances. So you're probably not going to do pre-employment alcohol testing, for example, because then you run into some Americans with Disabilities Act issues, the ADA. But you are going to test for all of these other drugs on a pre-employment basis, unless you're in a state that prohibits it. Right now, the state of New York is the only state that prohibits employers from testing for marijuana on a pre-employment basis, on a random basis. There is some loophole language in the Department of Labor regulations in the state of New York that clearly would allow post-accident or reasonable suspicion testing for marijuana. But otherwise, you can't test for marijuana in the state of New York unless it's required by law, as in the case of the DOT regulations. There are other states that that will dictate or prohibit what you can do with the result, as I mentioned earlier. But that may affect whether or not you want to test for marijuana on a pre-employment basis. Say, for example, in Nevada, where you can't refuse to hire somebody based solely on the fact that that individual tested positive on a pre-employment screen for marijuana. There has to be some other reasons in addition to the positive test why you chose not to hire that individual. Most states, the vast majority of states, even the marijuana-friendly states like Nevada, Illinois, or not Nevada, but Illinois, Colorado, California, etc., would still allow you to do that. They would still allow you not to hire somebody who tests positive. But again, we go back to that language we talked about earlier. You want to make sure that when you know those marijuana laws as they affect drug testing, and that you're not discriminating it in any way that would be in conflict with the language of the laws that apply to you. So be very careful about that when you're choosing how you're going to test and which drugs you're going to test for and under what circumstances. Now, I'm going to kind of breeze past these next few slides, but you're going to have them to look at in the recording of the presentation. It just talks about the pros and cons of lab-based urine testing, in instant urine testing, lab-based oral fluid testing, instant oral fluid testing, and hair testing. Now, I do want to go back to the instant testing because that's popular also. Not as popular as lab-based testing, but it is a choice, an alternative that employers can consider. There are certain pros and cons to both instant urine testing and instant oral fluid testing that you're going to weigh as you consider which drug testing method to use. And based on that decision-making process, you're going to explain very specifically in your policy what drug testing methods you're using. And so when it comes to instant testing, rapid result testing, point of collection testing, lots of different ways to call it, you want to just make sure that you're choosing a device and a method that makes it possible for you to feel confident about the results. And one of the ways that you can feel confident about those results is to make sure that if somebody does test positive, if it's a presumptive positive or a non-negative, that you confirm the results at a laboratory and that a medical review officer has the option, or you have the option to use medical review officer to verify those results if they're confirmed positive in the laboratory. And that gives you that legal defensibility that makes it possible for you to confidently take action based on the positive result, even if it's from an instant result, instant testing device like an oral fluid or a urine testing device. As I mentioned, hair testing is a little bit different. And so let's look at all of them side by side on the left there in terms of the window of detection. If you look all the way to the left of that graphic there where it says breath, blood, oral fluid, urine, and hair, you can see that all the way to the left is when the window of detection opens for breath, blood, and oral fluid. Now, there are no breath testing devices currently commercially on the market, but we anticipate as an industry that'll happen soon. Those three methods, oral fluid in particular, have the ability to identify the parent drug and not just a metabolite of a drug. And so the parent drug becomes detectable in an oral fluid sample or blood, for example, within minutes after the individual using it. Let's just say, to be safe, 15 minutes. But how long that window of detection stays open varies significantly. With breath, we think it's going to be about 2-3 hours. With blood, it could be several days. Same with oral fluid. Now, with urine, there's a lag time of 6 or 7 hours before the metabolite of the drug the person used becomes detectable in a urine sample. It takes several hours for the body to metabolize the drug so that the metabolite becomes detectable, because we're not looking for the parent drug in a urine sample. We're looking for a metabolite of the drug. With hair, drugs don't become detectable for 7 to 10 days after usage, but the window of detection stays open for about 90 days. So it's a great pre-employment test in certain safety-sensitive industries, very popular among large trucking companies, for example, whereas urine is right now the only test method that DOT allows. Of course, lab-based oral fluid testing right on its heels. There'll be an implementation period once those final guidelines come out, but I think a lot of companies will consider that because the collection process is a little easier and because it has the ability to detect recent use. and you're going to articulate that in your policy. You're going to explain the benefits or the advantages of the drug testing method that you choose so that your employees know why you do oral fluid instead of urine, or urine instead of oral fluid or hair. Now, part of it may be related to the graphic on the far right of the screen, which is the window of impairment, how long marijuana can be impairing to the individual user. There are a lot of factors that come into play, right? The individual's drug use history, the THC intensity or potency of the marijuana that they're using, how they use the marijuana. Are they smoking it, or are they eating marijuana edibles? And then what tasks are they being asked to do? Are they trying to remember instructions, or are they operating a forklift or a delivery van, et cetera? And all of those things are combined together to play a role in or to influence how long the impairment from marijuana will last for an individual. There was a study that came out from the University of Sydney, not too many years, like 2021, that looked at 80 different studies. So sort of hard to argue with 80 different studies. They came to the conclusion that marijuana impairment lasts on average from 3 to 10 hours. And so you want a drug testing method that detects recent use, in case somebody comes back from a lunch break and they smell of marijuana, but you also want one that lasts for the entire window of impairment, because that will affect lots of different things that you're gonna, again, including your policy. For example, most states allow employers to move to deny workers' comp benefits if an individual involved in an accident tests positive. Well, if you're testing right after the individual's use, you want that recent use detection capability with the drug testing method. But you also want to be able to extend beyond those first 15, 30 minutes to that full 10-hour window of impairment, so that if it becomes necessary to move to deny a workers' comp claim, you've got a drug test result that covers that entire window of impairment. Again, affected by lots of different factors. Urine's not going to open up quite early enough. Breath is going to close a little too soon for the entire window of impairment. Now, let me say this about breath and urine. They're both good. When breath comes out, I think it's going to be a good thing, and urine, of course, is out there. You choose the drug testing method that best meets your needs. And so even though one or the other doesn't cover the entire window of impairment, it may fit your needs better than oral fluid or hair. Oral fluid probably is the most user-friendly, but again, you're going to choose the method that best meets your needs, that increases the opportunity to achieve your objectives with your drug testing program. And you're going to put that into the policy statement. You're going to actually write that up so that as employees look at your program, as they look at the policy, they're going to be able to tell exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you feel free to let them know that there's a return on investment that you're expecting to see from your drug testing program. That's very important. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these slides except to say that on average, about 15% of full-time workers are current substance abusers. So take the number of employees you have in your company, multiply it by 15, or as I've done here, be more conservative and only use 5%. In this case, that comes out to 13 employees times the average cost of each substance abuser, according to a University of Chicago study that said it's about $8,100. You can see that those 13 employees are costing you over $100,000. And then you just look at the cost of your drug testing program. If you're doing 300 tests at $45 a test, and I'm by no means suggesting that's a good or a bad price, but just for calculation purposes, you see that comes out to $13,500, which means that if I can avoid hiring those substance abusers that are going to cost me $8,100 a year, or prevent accidents from happening, et cetera, that factor into that $8,100, then I'm going to save, after my drug testing costs, I'm going to save about $9,100, a little bit more. That's the return on investment that you're looking for in a very general way. If you look at it from a drug testing method standpoint, urine versus oral fluid versus hair, they're very similar in what they cost on the in the terms of hard dollars, what your test is going to cost. But you may save money on the back end with the soft dollars and how the collection gets done. Those are all things that Orange Tree can help you with. So I won't go into all of that. but just know that drug testing always returns a very positive ROI. No matter how you do it, no matter how many you do, your ROI is always going to be positive. Drug testing always is a money saver for the companies that do it. Now, I'm running out of time. I covered a lot of this already as to when you test, pre-employment, post-accident, reasonable suspicion. This again depends on why you're testing, and the laws that apply to you. The value of pre-employment testing, which is something that many employers are confused about now because of these legal marijuana laws, I think the value of pre-employment testing is solid. I think it always makes sense to do pre-employment testing. I know that there are some employers that think that it hurts their chances of finding people to hire, but I don't want to hire somebody that tests positive or that's going to test positive. I want to deter those people from applying for jobs with my company. The vast majority of individuals support employer drug testing programs, and many drug users admit that they wouldn't even apply for a job that does pre-employment drug testing or conducts random testing. So I want to advertise the fact that I do these types of tests so that it deters individuals who I don't necessarily want to hire from even applying for a job with my company. And that applies to random testing, post-accident, reasonable suspicion. There's just a few calculations here, but I'm going to share this one, then skip the next couple of slides. 29% of illicit drug using employees say they would be less likely to work for employers who conduct random drug testing, and 6.9% of workers who do not use drugs say they would be less likely to work for a company that does conduct random testing. In other words, I want to hire from that, 90% plus group that had no problem with the random drug testing program of my company. I don't want to hire those 29% who said they're less likely to apply. So I want them to know that at my company, we conduct random testing, so they don't even apply for a job with the company. Now, let me just conclude with 5 basic things that you can do with your policy. 1, to make it legally defensible, you may want to follow a federal program for drug testing, even if you're not required under the DOT regulations to do that. That includes some safeguards like using a medical review officer, confirming non-negative or presumptive positive initial screens. You want to use a drug testing method that the federal government's endorsed, urine or oral fluid. Right now, I think someday hair will be part of that as well. But always you want to rely on that MRO to verify the results from the laboratory. And I want to make sure that I train my supervisors to understand what their responsibilities are and what their responsibilities are not. I'm not expecting them to be, substance abuse experts. I just want them to do their job and look at job performance, and then, be clear with employees that if you're using drugs, we're going to know it because your performance is just not going to measure up to your coworkers. And I want to provide employee education to help them understand the dangers of drug abuse and how it affects their job security. But also, I want them never to be able to come back to me and say, I didn't know, or you never told me. That's an important part. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we want to comply with all the laws that apply to your company. If you're in multiple states, you may have to have policy with multiple addendums to the policy to make sure that you're in compliance with all of those laws. And as you see on the right, just in conclusion, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can, that I'm making my good faith effort to keep my workplace and my workers safe so that I can avoid negligent hiring or respond to superior lawsuits that essentially hold me, the employer, responsible for the behavior of my employees. Even if marijuana has been legalized in your state, it doesn't relieve you of the responsibility of being responsible for the behavior of your workers. If they cause an accident while on the job and they hurt someone or cause property damage, that's going to come back on you as the employer. And if you have no way to go back and say that you make a good faith effort to avoid these things from happening, like pre-employment drug testing, et cetera, then you're probably going to be on the hook for a lot of costs there. And so I've already touched on all of these right here. Just know that if you do have any questions, you can always come back to Orange Tree and they're going to answer those questions for you. Orange Tree is a great source of information on how to do drug testing, when to test, to comply with the laws that apply to you. And so I'm glad that we did this webinar because it touched on a lot of important issues, but we covered a lot of information in a short period of time. So we'll take your questions now, but going forward, if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to Orange Tree and find out how they can help you. And so, Jeff, let me turn it back over to you to see if we've got some questions from our audience.
Sounds good, Bill. Thank you very much for that presentation. Again, just probably not enough time for all the details, but thank you very much for bringing us up to date. The one question that we do have, while others, I invite everyone, if you have your questions now, feel free to continue to submit those and we will get to those. A question we have is, it's a kind of a citing of an industry situation. Quest is no longer licensed in Nevada for workers' compensation. How does an employer go about getting a new drug testing provider for workers' compensation?
Well, Jeff, I would probably, as I've done throughout this webinar, I would defer to Orange Tree on issues like that. But that is a good question because you do have to make sure that the laboratory that you're using is licensed in the state that you're doing your drug testing, and or has a SAMHSA certification or is a SAMHSA certified lab, which all states accept SAMHSA certification. Specifically, as this individual is asking about the Nevada workers' compensation regulations, I'd have to go back and look at that specifically to give a more concrete answer. But if you'd like to, we can do that and then provide a more specific response through Orange Tree.
Okay, very good. There was a brief comment about Colorado Light. Bill, I apologize. I had to step away for a moment. Maybe there's context that you recall from your slide deck where that comment question would make sense.
Well, what I said, and I said it a few times, is that there are some states that have legalized marijuana that have placed more restrictions on employers' rights to deal with a positive test for marijuana than other states. Colorado is one of those states. Now, when I talked about marijuana impairment, how long it lasts, and the factors that contribute to that duration of impairment, I mentioned that one of them is the THC level within the marijuana that the individual is using. So back in the day, back in the 70s, when I was going through high school, the potency level of marijuana, THC level in the marijuana that was commonly, used in those days throughout the country was about 5 to 7%, maybe even less than that, 3-4% in some cases. Meaning that the THC, the psychoactive ingredient in the marijuana, was only that much of the marijuana that the individual was smoking. It was, let's say, 5%. Today in Colorado, you can find legal dispensaries for marijuana that have potency levels above 70%. And so you're getting a ton of THC in the marijuana that you smoke in Colorado. And that THC is a determining factor in the level of impairment of the user and how long the impairment will last. If you have employees in Colorado who are smoking marijuana with a THC level of 70%, they're definitely, I think I can say this without ever having talked to the individual that we may be thinking of, that individual's cannot safely operate a motor vehicle, a forklift, probably can't remember instructions very well. Depending on what you're asking them to do, they may be able to do it. But in safety sensitive occupations, as an employer, you wouldn't want those individuals working for you, operating forklifts or other safety sensitive equipment, because their impairment would probably be more intense and last longer than somebody in another state that's smoking marijuana with, say, a 15% THC level. And so that's all I was referring to with Colorado.
Makes sense. Thank you very much. I have another question here. Looking for your recommendation on the screening window for pre-employment, 24 hours, 48 hours. And a follow-on question, when does that timeline start? At the offer or perhaps at the beginning of the background check? Or is there even another step an employer can choose to work with their candidate on the drug test process?
So that's going to depend a lot on the state laws that come into play, and essentially what objectives the employer has for their pre-employment testing program. Lots of times when a company offers a job, and I'm sure Orange Tree deals with this every day, when a company offers somebody a job, they want them to, and they've gone through whatever screening process they're going to go through at that point. Either with the background screen or maybe they're doing the drug screen first, but they're going to want to conduct that drug screen sooner than later. And then, in most states, not every state, but again, the states come into play. You've conducted that pre-employment screen only after you've made a conditional offer of employment. There are a bunch of states, I don't know the exact number, but a lot of states require that. If you're going to do pre-employment testing, you have to wait until you've made a conditional offer of employment, which may be based on clearing the pre-employment screen and also passing the pre-employment drug test. And so you're going to want to conduct that test as soon as possible after you've made this conditional offer of employment. One, so that you can get on with the hiring process, but two, so that you're not giving somebody 5 days to abstain from using marijuana, for example, so that it's enough out of their system that they're not going to test positive with your drug testing method, whether it's oral fluid, urine. If it's hair, there's still a possibility that if they're a regular user, they're going to test positive. But Jeff, that brings up another good point, which is, I hear this all the time, and it's really a misunderstanding about drug testing, that if you test somebody with urine, that individual could test positive for 3 or 4 weeks because the marijuana is going to be in their system. It's true that marijuana is detectable in urine for 3 or 4 weeks, depending on a lot of factors. But at the cutoff levels that we typically use when it comes to employment drug testing, the window of detection with urine is really 3 to 4 days. It's not 3 to 4 weeks. Orange Tree is not going to report a result back to you of somebody who last used marijuana a month ago or 6 weeks ago, because the cutoff level is going to only show you the test results that are, either under or above that cutoff level. And that's all that's going to get reported to you. You're not going to get, these sort of outlier positive results. It would be highly uncommon. And in the early days of drug testing, again, going back to my founder days, as Jeff would say, there were lots of lawsuits of laboratories that were geared toward the science or the technology of drug testing because of that very issue. And we just don't see those kinds of lawsuits anymore. It's highly, I can't remember the last time I saw a significant lawsuit in the news of an employee suing a laboratory because they reported a result that was outside that 3 to 4 day window of detection that's typical with urine testing, and even shorter with oral fluid testing. So that's another factor to take into consideration when you're choosing your drug testing method. How long do you want to be able to detect drugs? When it comes to pre-employment testing, you may want that longer window of detection of 3 to 4 days versus oral fluid of 24 hours with THC, or a day or 2 with cocaine, et cetera.
It makes sense, Bill. Thank you for that answer. I guess I would just add what we see as a background screen provider working with organizations to implement a drug testing policy. On one side, they're kind of to the point you're making, which is you really want to know what's going on with the candidate. And so there's kind of a desire to maybe as quickly as 48 hours have the candidate complete that test. So that's on the one side. The other side, we have others, and I think it's just a very general comment, and that is they look at the candidate pool, a number of employment, economic factors, macro factors in terms of availability of talent, how long positions have been open, and we've seen some clients who wait as long as 10 days. So on the 10-day side, that can really have an impact on your turnaround time and all the things that go into a turnaround time and delays and whatnot. Perhaps a candidate goes somewhere else. And then on the other end, with the 2-day turnaround, that can be pretty quick. Clients tell us, and then they have to go through kind of a re-registration process, reordering process, which maybe is an impact to the recruiter productivity. So on average, we see a 3 to 4 day waiting period at the And it's after the offer letter in our situation in all cases. And it really is at the beginning of the background check. Both the background and the drug test begin simultaneously. So a lot of factors that go into it. They have the characteristics that you described, Bill, and we work with clients on this all the time, and we have captured all this data. So if you're interested to learn more about maybe what your peers are doing, how they're cycling through similar sorts of issues to make decisions, we're here to help you at Orange Tree. And so I guess I would close that question with that remark. We are at the top of the hour, and everyone, thank you very much for your attendance today. There is a handout if you haven't seen that in the Q&A. There will be communications following today's webinar for SHRM credits for the ability to link to this webinar, share it with others, as well as to download a handout if you didn't find it in the Q&A window. So, Bill, thank you very much for the insight, the information, the thorough discussion. Slide deck, as always, has a ton of information. We're very appreciative of what you do to help us, help our clients understand drug testing, policies, issues, and overall really help them conduct the proper engagement procedures that's in the best interest of their business. Everyone,
my pleasure. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you, Bill. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time.